Montana Territory, July 1879. The sun was just tipping over the edge of the Bitterroot Mountains when the stagecoach wagon broke a wheel and left Willa Kersey stranded in the dust with nothing but a battered carpetbag, a worn pair of boots, and a letter from a family who no longer wanted her. She stood alone in the rising heat, her skirts already streaked in mud, her cheeks flushed from effort and shame. Behind her, the driver cursed and kicked at the broken spoke. Ahead, the road stretched empty and silent. "Figures," Willa muttered, gripping the handle of her bag harder. Even the wagon gave up on me. She was not supposed to be here. She had been meant for Helena, to work as a seamstress in a dress shop her aunt had promised to arrange. But the letter that met her in Fort Benton changed everything. Her aunt had remarried, moved south, and sent a few coins in apology. "Too many mouths now," the letter had said. "You'll find your way." Willa was 22 with no family, no prospects, and a face that always seemed too plain for anyone to look at twice, except one man did. A rider came over the ridge, horse steady and sure-footed, moving with the ease of someone who belonged to the land. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, blue shirt rolled at the sleeves, and his face was weathered in a way that said he had worked through more than one kind of storm. He noticed her before he noticed the wagon. "You all right, miss?" His voice was low and even. "I am not hurt, if that is what you mean," Willa said, brushing her skirt and trying not to sound as small as she felt. "But I do not know where I am going. The driver says he cannot fix the wagon until morning." The man dismounted with practiced grace, tying his reins to a fence post. "You are a long way from anywhere useful," he said, glancing at the wheel. "Nearest ranch is mine. I can offer you a place to rest till that wheel is right." She stared at him, unsure. "I am not asking anything of you," he said quickly, reading her pause. "Just seems wrong to leave you standing in the sun with nowhere to go." Willa hesitated, then nodded once. "Thank you." They rode double on his horse, her hands clutching the saddle horn while he guided them through the grassland trail. She said little. He did not push. His name, she learned, was Jesse Ellard. He was 28, ran cattle and a few dozen acres of land after his father passed last year. No wife, no brothers, just him and a ranch hand who came and went. The house was quiet, simple, with a porch that looked out toward the hills. He offered her water, bread, and a place to sit in the shade. She took it all with quiet gratitude. Later, as the sun dipped low and the driver returned with 2 mules and a fresh wheel, Jesse walked her back to the road. "Thank you again," Willa said, adjusting her grip on the carpetbag. "For not making it harder than it already was." He looked at her then, not in passing, not polite but really looked. At her tired eyes, the set of her mouth, the way she stood like someone who expected to be sent away. "You are welcome," he said. Then he added, "But if you ever find yourself with no place to go again, my door's open." Willa blinked. "Why would you offer that to someone like me?" He frowned, like the question made no sense. "Because you have eyes that do not give up," he said slowly. "And because you are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." She froze. "That is not funny." "I am not joking," Jesse said, voice firm. "You are not just pretty enough, you are more than enough." Her breath caught. No one had ever said that to her, not once, not even close. The driver called for her. She turned, dazed, and stepped into the coach. She looked out the window just once as they pulled away. He raised a hand. She raised hers back. 2 weeks passed. She found a room above a mercantile in Helena, sewing for the shop downstairs. But her thoughts kept drifting back to a quiet ranch house and the man who said she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. One evening, while mending a boy's shirt, the owner of the shop came up the stairs. "There is someone asking for you," she said. "Cowboy looking sort." Willa's heart jumped. She wiped her hands and stepped down the stairs. Jesse stood there, hat in his hands, boots dusty from the trail. "I was coming into town for supplies," he said. "Thought I would check if you were still here." "I am," she said. "I know it is not my place," he said, eyes steady, "but I was wondering if you might want to come back to the ranch. I could use help with some bookkeeping. Maybe someone to cook something that does not taste like ash." She stared at him, heat rushing to her cheeks. "Are you offering me a job?" "I am offering you a home," Jesse said. "If you want it." Willa's throat tightened. "I do not belong in a place like that." "You belong wherever you are wanted," he said, "and I want you there with me." She let out a shaky breath. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Jesse said. "I know you are strong. I know you do not quit. I know you have been through more than most and still stand straight, and I know I have not stopped thinking about you since that day." Willa looked down at her hands. "I still do not think I am pretty." He stepped closer, lifted her chin with 2 fingers. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he said again, slow and sure, like a promise, her eyes filled without warning. She blinked fast, trying to keep it all in. "All right," she whispered. "All right." He smiled, took her carpetbag from behind the counter and held the door open. They rode back together under the wide Montana sky, side by side this time, both of them quiet, both of them holding more than they could say just yet. But it was enough. They were going home. The first morning at the Ellard ranch came with a hush that settled over the land like a wool blanket. Willa stood on the porch with a tin cup in her hands, steam curling into the cool air. To the west, the pasture was still shadowed, the cattle nothing but dark shapes moving slow through dew-slick grass. She wore her hair braided back, sleeves rolled to her elbows, apron tied at the waist. The house behind her smelled of sourdough and hot tallow. She'd already swept the hearth and let the kettle boil over once. Jesse hadn't said much when she burned the beans, just took the pan, handed her a fresh one, and started over beside her. Now he was out by the barn, splitting fence rails with the methodical rhythm of someone who didn't mind the work. She watched a long moment, then went to join him. "You don't have to help with this," he said, pausing only to push his sleeve higher. His forearms were dusted with saw chips, the axe resting at his side. "I don't mind," she said, lifting one end of the timber. "Besides, I'd rather be useful than idle." He nodded, and they worked in tandem for a while, her steady with the brace, him driving the wedge clean through. The scent of fresh pine rose with each split. "You always this quiet?" Jesse asked after a stretch of wordless labor. "Only when I'm thinking." "What about? How long it'll take before you regret bringing me here?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he set the axe aside and leaned both arms on the fence beam. "I don't do things I don't mean," he said. "If I brought you, it's because I wanted to." Willa turned to face him fully. Her cheeks were flushed from the sun, freckles standing out sharper now that she wasn't hidden behind city soot. "I'm not used to being wanted," she said. "Not without having to earn it first." Jesse's gaze didn't waver. "You ever think maybe you already earned it just by being who you are?" She looked away, throat tight. "That can't be all there is to it." "Why not?" "Because that's not how the world works." "It is on this land," he said. Later that day, Willa found the ledger tucked behind a jar of nails in the kitchen cupboard. She brought it to the table, set out a stub of pencil, and began working through the numbers. The pages were cramped and smudged, Jesse's handwriting leaning uphill like the slope of his pasture. She didn't ask permission, just began sorting the entries by month, then listing the cattle sold, the feed bought, the debts owed. By dusk, Jesse came in with his shoulders streaked in sweat and his boots thick with clay. He paused when he saw her at the table. "You found that old thing. It was hiding behind your fence nails." He walked over, leaned down to see her notes. That your handwriting? Yes. Looks like it could hold a wall up, he said. Straight as fence wire. She let out a short laugh, surprised by it. I like numbers, she said. They don't change what they mean depending on who's looking at them. He reached for the ledger, flipped a page. Think you could keep tracking it? I lose count halfway through the month. I'd rather do this than mend shirts all day. Then it's yours. She finished the entry and set the pencil down. You sure you don't mind sharing your space with someone who isn't always easy to be around? You think I'm easy? He asked, one brow lifting. She laughed again, the second time in one day. Point taken. That night she lay in the small back room with the window cracked open. The air smelled of dry hay and late summer. She could hear the wind rubbing against the shutters and the low groan of the barn roof shifting in the dark. She didn't sleep for a long time. Her hands were sore from work, her mind full of numbers and the sound of Jesse's voice saying her name like it meant something. In the morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and the thud of boots on the porch. She pulled on her dress, braided her hair without a mirror and stepped into the kitchen. Jesse was at the stove, brow furrowed as he turned a pan of cornbread. I figured I'd try, he said, not turning. You did it yesterday. She stepped beside him, reached for a clean plate. You're going to burn it. Already did. She took the pan, flipped the bread onto the plate. It was scorched on one side, golden on the other. He looked at her then, the corner of his mouth lifting. Still edible, she said, slicing it in half. They ate in silence at first, the kind that didn't need filling. After he finished, Jesse reached into his pocket and set a folded piece of paper on the table. What's that? Deed to the south pasture, he said. It's in my name, but I'd like to add yours. Willa stared at the paper. Why? Because you're not just visiting, you're part of this place now. She didn't answer right away. Her hands were still, resting on the tabletop. I never thought I'd have anything that couldn't be taken away. You do now, he said. You have this. You have me. She reached across the table. Her fingers brushed his. It was quiet again, but this time it felt different, rooted, steady. Like something had settled into place, and neither of them moved to break it. The rains came slow at first, just a soft patter on the tin roof that made Willa pause while folding linens. It thickened by evening, drumming steady as if the sky meant to wash the whole valley clean. Jesse returned late, soaked through and trailing the scent of wet horse and pine bark. He set his hat on the peg by the door without a word and leaned over to pull off his boots, mud clinging to the soles like it had no mind to let go. Willa handed him a dry towel and turned back to the stove, ladling stew into a tin bowl. He didn't sit right away. Just stood behind her, quiet until she tilted her head. You all right? He took the bowl from her, fingers brushing hers. Found a calf tangled in wire. Didn't make it. I'm sorry. He nodded, but the line in his brow didn't ease. He ate standing, gaze lost somewhere beyond the rain-slick window. Willa didn't press. Instead, she poured 2 cups of chicory and sat at the table, waiting until he joined her. You ever lose much? He asked after a time, picking at the edge of the cup. She looked down, fingering the seam of her apron. I lost a sister. Fever took her when I was 12. After that, I stopped expecting things to last. Jesse's hand stilled. Didn't know you had a sister. She was older, Willa said. Taught me to thread a needle. Taught me how to lie when the truth wouldn't keep me safe. He didn't say anything, but the silence between them shifted, no longer empty, but shared. When they finished, she cleared the table, setting the dishes in the basin. Jesse stood and stepped behind her, his hand finding the small of her back. I'm not much good at talking when things go wrong, he said. I don't expect you to be, she replied, not turning, but I expect you to stay. I will. She leaned back slightly, enough to rest against him. Then we'll be all right. The morning after, the sky opened clean and wide, the air sharp with the scent of wet earth and cottonwood. Willa rolled up her sleeves and stepped into the garden, where the rain had scattered the rows and softened the ground enough to sink her boots halfway to the ankle. She knelt to right the overturned squash vines, her hands caked in silt by mid-morning. Jesse came from the barn with a length of rope slung over his shoulder, his shirt damp at the collar. He crouched beside her, watching her fingers work the soil. "You ever think of planting something just for yourself?" he asked. "I don't know what I'd choose. Not what you're supposed to grow, just want to." She looked at the open patch beside the fence, then back at him. "Maybe lilacs," he smiled, the skin at the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Lilacs it is." That afternoon she found a crate by the porch steps. Inside were 6 saplings, roots wrapped in burlap still damp from the nursery box. No note, just the trees waiting. She didn't ask how far he'd gone to fetch them. She only brought them water and dug the holes herself, one by one, while Jesse mended saddle straps nearby. By dusk, they stood together, shoulder to shoulder, looking over the fence line where the lilacs now sat nestled in their new earth. "They'll take a few seasons," he said. "I'm not going anywhere," she answered, brushing the dirt from her palms. That night, Jesse lit the lamp while she stitched a hem beside the fire. He sat across from her, thumbing through a dog-eared almanac. "We'll need to fix the roof before snow," he said. "I can help, I know." She looked up then, her needle paused mid-thread. "You never ask why I stayed." "Don't need to," he said, "but I hope it's because you want to." "I do," Willa said, setting the cloth aside. "It's the first place that's ever felt like mine." He rose from the chair and crossed to her, his hand reaching to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You're not here to fill a space," Jesse said. "You are the space. Everything's different with you in it." She reached for his hand, held it with both of hers. "You make me feel like I belong." His voice was low. "You always did." They stood like that, the fire crackling low, the room warm with something stronger than wood smoke. No grand promises, no need. Only 2 people who had found something steady in each other, something quiet and rare, and neither doubted it would last. By early September, the days had thinned to gold. Light came later over the hills, pooled soft against the porch railings, and lingered in the dust rising behind the cattle. The air took on a bite that warned of frost, though the trees still held their color. Willa had taken to wearing Jesse's old flannel when she rose to start the stove, the sleeves rolled twice to keep them out of the dishwater. She'd begun pressing herbs in a book she found shelved behind the butter churn, a frayed volume of sermons no one had opened in years. She tucked sprigs of mint and wild yarrow between the pages, folding parchment around them. Jesse noticed once and asked if she was planning to start a tonic shop. She'd only smiled and said, "I like having something that stays where I put it." One afternoon, while Jesse cleaned tack in the lean-to shed, Willa walked the fence line with a bundle of wool and a length of thread looped around her wrist. A lamb had taken to slipping under the lowest rail. She patched the gap with a weave of coarse cloth, tied taut with knots she'd learned watching her father mend fishing nets before the fever took him. "Never figured you for a fence mender," Jesse said when he came to find her. "Never figured you for a man who'd let a lamb run loose," she replied, brushing straw from her skirt. They walked back side by side, not speaking until they reached the porch. Jesse paused before the steps, glancing toward the barn. "Town council sent a letter," he said. "They're asking folks to donate meat for the winter pantry. The mill laid off 10 men. Some families won't make it otherwise." Willa nodded. "We can spare some." "I thought so," Jesse said, then hesitated. "There's a harvest dance, too." "They're holding it in the barn behind the chapel." She looked up. "You thinking of going? Only if you are." I haven't danced in years. Neither have I, he said, but I'd like to try. The night of the gathering, Willa wore a dress she'd sewn from bolt cloth she'd found in the attic. It was plain brown, but cut to fit her shoulders right, and she'd trimmed the cuffs with a band of navy ribbon. Jesse wore his cleanest shirt, collar stiff from starch, and a vest that hadn't seen daylight since his father's funeral. They rode into town by lantern light, the wagon wheels creaking over hardened dirt. The chapel yard was lit with torches, the barn strung with oil lamps and pine garlands. Fiddle music spilled from the open doors, warm and fast. Inside, couples turned in slow circles or stamped boots to the faster reels. Willa stood near the edge, hands clasped, eyes drawn to the way skirts and boots moved in time like they'd been born knowing how. Jesse offered his hand. "I'll step on your toes," she warned. "Then we'll match." She let him lead her onto the floor. They started slow, her hand light in his, their steps hesitant at first. But after a few turns, a rhythm found them. He followed the beat, and she followed him, not with nerves but trust. "You always move like this?" Jesse asked, voice low near her temple. "Only when I forget anyone's watching," she said. "Then let's both forget." Later, they sat outside on the wagon bench, the music drifting soft behind them. Willa pulled the shawl around her shoulders and leaned into his side. "I used to think I'd never be chosen," she said. "You weren't chosen," Jesse said. "You were seen." The torchlight caught in her eyes made them darker, steadier. "I want to stay," she said. "Not just in the house, in all of it, the ranch, the land, the work." "With you, you already have," he said, "but I want to know it's mine too." Jesse reached into his coat, drew out a small pouch. Inside was a simple band of silver, hand-cut, the metal scraped smooth with a whetstone. "It's not store-bought," he said. "But I made it with my hands, and I'd give it to you if you'll wear it." Willa took the ring, turning it between her fingers as if testing its weight. "I never expected this," she said, voice unsteady. "I did," Jesse said. "From the first time I saw you standing on that road like you didn't owe the world a single apology." She slid the ring onto her finger. It fit. They didn't kiss then. Not yet. Just sat watching the last of the dancers twirl through the barn light. The night cooling around them, the future folding open like a field left fallow too long, now ready to grow. The snow came before the ground had fully hardened. Willa woke to frost painting the windows in delicate ferns, and the smell of damp wool hung in the air from the coats drying near the hearth. She stood at the stove in thick stockings and Jesse's flannel draped over her shift, watching the flame catch beneath the kettle. Outside, the world had gone quiet under a thin white sheet. Jesse came in from the barn with a red nose and a crooked grin, carrying a sack of oats over one shoulder. "Cows have gone stubborn," he said, setting the sack down by the door. "Took me near half an hour to get old Marla to budge." "She always did have opinions," Willa said, pouring 2 cups of coffee. "I expect she thinks she runs the place." Jesse took the mug from her hand, his fingers brushing hers, then leaned his hip against the table. "Ryder came through yesterday while you were at the creek," he said. "Brought a parcel from Helena." Willa wiped her hands on a cloth and lifted an eyebrow. "Didn't expect anything." "Was wrapped in muslin, tied with twine. I put it in the chest." She knelt to open it, lifting the lid with care. Inside was a small wooden box and a folded paper. She unfolded the letter first, her eyes scanning the words slowly. "It's from the woman who ran the mercantile," she said. "She found something after I left, said it belonged to my sister." Jesse crouched beside her as she opened the box. Inside lay a spool of blue thread, worn near the middle, and a brass thimble etched with a tiny sunburst. "She must have brought it with her when we left home," Willa said, voice low. "I never knew she kept it." Jesse didn't speak. He only laid a hand over hers, steady as always. They spent the rest of the morning mending harnesses and checking the smokehouse. The cold had settled in for good, and Willa began laying out heavier quilts at night. She patched Jesse's coat where it had worn thin at the shoulder and began knitting a scarf in dark green, though she didn't tell him yet. One evening, after supper, Jesse cleared his throat and leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I've been thinking," he said. "We ought to have it done proper." Willa looked up from her sewing. "What, married? Not just in the way of sharing a roof and chores. I mean standing before a preacher and saying so." She set the needle down. "You really want that?" "I do. Not for the sake of papers or names. Just to have it said plain, that you're mine and I'm yours in front of someone who can bless it." Willa folded her hands in her lap, feeling the weight of the moment settle warm in her chest. "Then let's do it," she said. "Before the year turns." They rode into Fort Owen 2 weeks later, the sky clear and the roads half frozen. The chapel was plain, whitewashed and narrow, with a cracked bell that rang once as they crossed the threshold. The preacher was an old man with a wind-burned face and a soft voice, and his wife brought them tea while they waited. Willa wore her brown dress, the same one from the harvest dance, but she had added a strip of lace at the collar. Jesse wore his vest and a clean shirt, pressed at the edges. They stood side by side before the hearth, the preacher's voice low and even, the fire crackling behind them. When it came time to speak, Jesse turned to her, eyes steady. "I never looked for a wife," he said, "but I looked for shelter. And I found it in you." Willa's throat tightened, but she managed to speak. "I never knew what home meant," she said. "Not until I stepped off that coach and saw you standing in the dust." He took her hand and she slipped the silver ring back on, the one he'd made. This time it stayed. They rode home in silence, arms brushing as the wagon rocked over the frozen ruts. When they reached the ranch, Jesse lifted her down and carried her over the threshold without a word. She laughed once, surprised, and he kissed her forehead before setting her gently on her feet. Winter thickened around them. The days shortened, and smoke curled high from the chimney each morning. Willa filled the root cellar with jars of preserves, and Jesse carved a cradle from pine, though he didn't explain why until she placed his hand over the soft curve of her belly one evening near the fire. He didn't speak, but his eyes filled, and he kissed her knuckles one by one. The months passed quiet and full. Willa's belly grew, and the lilac saplings at the fence line held strong through the ice, their roots deepening beneath the snow. Jesse built a rocking chair from scrap oak and polished it smooth with beeswax. Willa stitched a quilt from the scraps of every shirt he'd worn thin, every dress she'd outgrown. In the spring, a girl was born, red-cheeked and dark-haired, with hands that curled tight around Jesse's thumb. They named her Clara after the sister Willa had lost. Jesse held her in the porch light that first warm evening, his voice low as he hummed the melody Willa had once sung in the kitchen. Willa watched from the doorway, her heart full beyond measure. They built a life in the slow, sure way that lasts. Days filled with work, with quiet meals, with the kind of love that needed no telling. Willa tended the garden, taught Clara to read using the old ledger pages, and planted more lilacs each year. Jesse kept the fences firm, the cattle fed, and never failed to bring Willa the first apple from the tree each fall. And when the years wore on, when their hair silvered and their hands grew lined, they still sat close on the porch each evening, watching the light fall across the field, the lilacs blooming tall and strong at the fence line. Nothing had come easy, but everything had come true. They were home. They were loved, and they were together, always.